بنعرف إذا بدنا نبلش بنسكر الباب واللي بده بيرجع بيفتح. Good evening. مساء الخير. نبدأ مع النشيد الوطني اللبناني. On behalf of the Architects Association at the Order of Engineers and Architects in Beirut, I would like to welcome you and thank you all for joining us in this lecture. First, we will start with the word of Architect Atif Mshaymish, President of Architects Association at the Order of Engineers and Architects in Beirut.
يعطيكم العافية. أنا ما حطول عليكم دقيقتين، كلمة مش مكتوبة. بدي رحب فيكم أول شي كلكم، بدي رحب فيك كمان، وبدي أشكركم لحضوركم لعنا على النقابة. حقيقة هيدا أول نشاط على صعيد الندوات اللي بتقوم فيه رابطة المعماريين لعام 2019 من بعد ما عملنا جائزة الجدرجي 2019 بالاشتراك مع الفرع ومؤسسة الجدرجي. نحن كنا حابين بصراحة بالأسبوع القادم، أو مش أسبوع القادم، كنا بعتقد الأسبوع القادم كنا حابين ندعيكم على جمعية عمومية. وحتى نحن الجمعية العمومية تعودنا ندعي عليها مش بس أعضاء الرابطة والمعماريين بشكل عام. مجلس النقابة طلب منا نأجل هذا الشيء لبعد الانتخابات لحتى ما يصير في نوع من التضارب بالموضوع. فإن شاء الله رح تكون بأول شهر 5 لأنه في عطلة طويلة وفي عنا جدول نشاطات طويل رح نطلعكم عليه بشكل مفصل. نحن بس البعض منا يعني سألني عدة سؤال هو ذاته كان عم يتكرر، انه نحن حابين نشارك بهيدا الرابطة، شو المجال اللي ممكن نساعد فيه. في هون شوي بس لغط بصير دائما بين الفرق بين الرابطة والفرع. طبعا بتعرفوا بنظام النقابة، وهيدي لو في طلاب لازم بلشوا تعودوا على هيدا المصطلحات. بالنقابة دائما في الفروع اللي هو بيكون في على رأسها رئيس الفرع اللي بيكون عضو مجلس نقابة، وفي رابطة هيئة إدارية ورئيس هيئة إدارية، رئيس هيئة إدارية لرابطة المعماريين. كذلك في بروابط أخرى إنشائيين وغيرهم. بالرابطة المعماريين وباقي الروابط يعني نشاطاتها محصورة بالنشاطات العلمية فقط. نحن دورنا نشاطات علمية وثقافية وتوجيهية، وما لنا علاقة لا بأنظمة ولا بقوانين ولا بإقرار مشاريع ولا كل هودي من مسؤولية مجلس النقابة وأعضاء ورئيس الفرع المعماريين. أنا بدعي الجميع يلي مش منضم للرابطة إنه ينضم لها لهيدي الرابطة. ونحن إن شاء الله بالجمعية العمومية اللي حتكون بأول شهر 5 رح نكون مقترحين مجموعة من اللجان اللي لها علاقة بالأنشطة. رح ندعي أي شخص بحب يفوت معنا باللجان ليكون واحد من هول اللجان، لأن نحن مقتنعين بالهيئة الإدارية إنه لا يمكن يعني نبني على النشاط بشكل فردي. النشاطات بدها تكون جماعية والكل لازم يشارك فيها. ما حطول الحديث مشان ما نأخركم. أنا بشكر حضوركم جميعا، وعلى أمل اللقاء بندوة تانية رح تعطي مختصر عنها ماريا، زميلتي ماريا، ب 11/4. مش هيك؟ ب 11/4 ندوة تانية كمان. يا ريت نعطي مختصر سريع عنها للحاضرين بشكل دقيقتين. وبشكركم مرة تانية وبشكر حضوركم.
So as requested, I will talk about the conference that will be held on April 11, it will be about neuroscience applied to architecture, which is the psychological part, but in a scientific way. So how do we examine the brain, and how do we know what people want, even if they don't know what they want consciously, so that they can feel the sense of attachment and identity in their cities. And the lecturers will be from Italy, from Australia, and from Lebanon. We all know that the industrial revolutions in general had helped opening, discovering, and expanding new horizons in terms of opportunities, as each industrial revolution composed a stepping stone from new perspectives in technology and business. Tonight, we will expound the concept of innovation and its relationship to entrepreneurship, and most importantly, we will explore the opportunities that the fourth revolution had offered to architects, most of us are architects here or in the design sector, to positively transform our careers and take advantage of the fourth revolution. Of course, at the end of the lecture, we will have an open discussion about the subject, but also about urban planning and architecture, right?
We can have some questions about that. I brought some slides at the end, and that can help with the discussion.
Our speaker is Jeronimo van Schendel. Mr. Jeronimo is a Spanish-Colombian architect. He graduated from the Superior Technical School of Architecture of Madrid in 2011. He holds a Master in Architecture with distinction from Harvard University Graduate School of Design since 2016. He has worked with some of the most renowned architects in Spain, such as Rafael Moneo, and he currently serves as office manager at AS Plus. His independent work is focused on identifying scalable entrepreneurship opportunities that relate design to technology and business models. Please help me welcome Mr. Jeronimo. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks everyone for coming. This is Sydney at the end of the 19th century, with horse carriages, and we can imagine the kind of atmosphere that was there. And then Henry Ford appeared with a new mentality, and in a very few years or decades, he completely transformed the cities into what we know. At that time, it was a great innovation. Now it's already creating problems, but at the time, it was really a new way of thinking. The way of thinking was basically based in identifying a problem in an objective way. Oh yeah, sorry. It's on now. Now, yeah, definitely. Okay. Well, welcome again. I was saying that this is Sydney at the end of the 19th century, and we could imagine very well with this picture the kind of atmosphere that was happening there, dominated by the horse carriages. Then Henry Ford appeared with a new mentality, a new way of thinking about problems and industry. And in very few years, with his mindset, he was able to transform cities into the sort of motorized landscapes that we are used to see in the cities everywhere, Beirut included. His way of thinking, what it had of important is that he was able to really define a problem in an objective way and in a very ample way, understand how a problem in the reality in an industry meant that at the same time there was an opportunity to change things, and that from that opportunity you could extract some value for society, and that solutions for that value, products or services, could be done, solutions for that problem, products or services could be done as a result of that value, delivering that value to society. He was actually not inventing, which is what many people think. And we could define invention as a new and interesting creation, like something that I just do for the sake of it, for the interest of the object or the idea itself. But he was innovating, which is thinking about an invention in a way that is conceived to be adopted and used massively by a wide segment of the society. So it includes all the problems of society from the very beginning, and viability, feasibility in terms of technical and economical side of it. What was the problem that he identified, really, in cities? I showed you Sydney at the end of the 19th century. That was a nice side. But the other side of the coin was this. In New York, Sydney, London, at the end of the 19th century, really, transportation was made mainly through horses. This is New York, and it had 150,000 horses mingling around, which produced more or less around 100,000 tons of waste per year. On top of that, well, they were dead in streets, and as we all know, a horse is pretty hard to carry on. So it was representing a logistic problem and many other kind of problematics for the city. As we can see in these kind of images of people treating that waste, which was challenging for hygiene in general. But that problem wasn't, so he looked at it in a way that was like really trying to be objective. So if we look at the horse carriage, which is this beautiful object and reality that in our minds of the 21st century is pretty romantic, for him it was really a problem of speed and performance, because as we know, compared to the car, of course, being in a horse is like pretty slower than it. As I mentioned, it was a problem of health and hygiene at the same time. It consumed space because you need to have the carriage, which is quite big, and at the same time you need to have the horse. But on top of that, you really need to have a space to rent or to own, where your horse could sleep and live and so on. No? On top of that, you always depend on, in general, in the model of that time, you would depend on the rider. Where you would just go to the office, go up, and you couldn't really go down and have your carriage there. That was not the model at all. And it was costly because you had to pay the horse, you had to pay the driver, and at the same time, because the proper speed of production and the way it was produced made that one single carriage was costly, and it had complicated maintenance cycles. So how did he transform that problem into really seeing an opportunity? By taking one step out or back and seeing not only what was that reality of the horse carriage, but what was the social, economical, and industrial environment that he was living in. In those years, the industry of vanadium was coming out, and vanadium, for those who are not familiarized with it, it's a metal that is very malleable, so you can do all sorts of shapes, curvatures, and tiny pieces with specific shapes. And he kind of grabbed that idea, and at the same time, the carburetor was coming from technology, kind of innovation, was up in the market, and some innovators were already working with it, like Mercedes-Benz and other people were implementing that idea into different technological developments. And in the side of socioeconomics, the American economy was boosting at that time, which meant that a very big amount of that society that was poor or nearly poor was rising and constituting a very important middle class, which had, of course, their own American dream, which was this aspirational idea of having the ideal family, as we can see in this image, with the kids, the dog, and why not a house that is owned by myself, a land that is owned by myself, and a car that I can own and that I can drive and that I can feel that I am sort of in control of. So he understood very well what was the spirit of his time in that sense, in very, coming from very different branches. What was the best solution? The best solution for him was actually Ford Model T, which was done in 1908. It was the first mass-produced car. It wasn't the first car, which is what many people think, but it was the first mass-produced car. And as we can see, it not only it represents the image of the carriage, but without a horse and instead a motor, but it really represents the idea of owning it and this aspirational idea of the society of the United States. As I was saying, the real invention of Ford wasn't the car. It was this. It was understanding that to make that car viable and feasible in the time and to respond and to substitute horse carriages, he needed to find a new way of of producing it, which was the assembly line. And what the assembly line brought is that this car is exactly the same as this one, exactly the same as this one, and all the other ones, and that you can really measure what is the time between one car and the other one in terms of production, which can help you to control the cost, which can help you to lower the cost and make it more available, affordable for the society, as well as standardized. Which is very important, not only for price reduction, but as well for maintenance and for kind of entering into the mind of the people who is wanting to buy it, because they understand really well what they're buying and what it implies, right? On top of that, really the assembly line and standardization boosted innovation, or were the seed for boosting innovation in the car industry, because in reality, we look at this car split or dismounted as we look at it right now. We could think of the industry of car production like a platform, right? A platform in which there is a coordinator, which is Volkswagen in this picture, which is this is a Volkswagen Golf, and there are clear rules about what has to be done so that we consider that there is a car that is already finished and is able to work. And then that standardization allows that one company really is able to produce the tire, another company is able to produce the airbag, another one the brakes, so on and so forth. All of them really coordinated by Volkswagen, which, by the way, takes care of a big chunk of the production and of the engineering. That allows that many minds, really, as we say, you know, in Spanish and in English, we say many minds think better than just one mind. So that really boosts innovation. The value proposition of this, which is understanding, we spoke about the problem, we spoke about his reading of the opportunity, and now what is interesting and important for architects and for the entrepreneurial mindset is to understand what is the real tangible value of each of these implicit solutions that the car represents, right? And to extrapolate that to any other problem that we face. So for him, the car really represented answers to the problems that people really wanted, wanted to solve. The motor to save time, self-driving to reduce space dependency, the machine to replace the animal to eliminate the health and hygiene problem, and the assembly line to remove the problem of cost and production speed. And then from there, we have to jump with this mindset to really understanding what is the business. A business is viable in the very principle of business is that I create something, a service or a product, and I sell it to you for a price, like 100, right? I use a limited amount of resources to produce it, right? Let's say 80, okay? 80 units of value. And I need to be able to sell it to you for 90, which is in between what I take to produce it and what you think it's worth, right? Sorry. I sell it for you. The principle is that I sell it to you for a higher value than what I basically take, right? So that what is very important is that the value that solution implies it really represents that higher value than what it takes to me to produce. So in that sense, for this person that we could imagine on a day-to-day basis, for him it was basically having a motor implied more time. Like if working with a horse would imply 1 hour to go to work and 1 hour back, and this implies just 1 hour in total. I'm saving 1 hour of my day, which in terms of salary is just money that I'm having in my pocket instead of spent in transportation. Also, not having to rent a space for the horse means savings. The machine at that time as well meant more time and more beauty, at least in the mind of that time. In our days, probably there are other vehicles that substitute that. And the assembly line basically meant that I have to pay money. So I have to pay less. So that means that basically value was like a pocket of tangible and intangible value, like money and this other idea such as beauty. That was what really represented what really made that the car was absolutely ideal to be massively adopted by that medium society of middle class society of the US. And I like very much this ad because it represents very well all the ideas, both the tangible ones and the intangible ones that he wanted to transmit. It is the production territory, the landscape of the US of that time, the ideal family, of course the car, and this phrase that he says, make it the best Ford touring car ever built and the greatest value ever offered, which was this idea of really business is about delivering more value to you than I take from you, right? So this idea of innovation can be, and this mindset can be really extrapolated to any other industries. If we take, for instance, the phones, we will see it right now, how it is important not only to be into the production of a great element such as this first mobile phone or its evolutions, but to really take a step back and be able to relate the creation and the design of that element with other variables as society, economy, industry, and so on and so forth. So if we stop at the first iPhone, what was really successful about it was not that it was really beautiful, and it was, and that was of course one of the value propositions of him, but that when you bought an iPhone, you bought a phone, you bought a navigator, you bought an iPod at the same time, and you bought the possibility and the potential in the future to get a lot of apps which actually perform things that you wouldn't expect, such as a calendar, which in the end is value because it saves you time, right? So that was the real innovation of Steve Jobs and Apple at that time, creating this platform that in which the phone is the integrator of operators on the one side, accessory manufacturers, users, and developers, publishers, retailers, brands, verticals, and so on that populate this environment. And if we think about it, it's the same that it's already happening with BIM, and it's the same that it is aligned with the direction that at least we believe that BIM is going to go to. Basically, BIM is, it's a platform in which you have many people collaborating at this point, and all of those people are designing things inside this creation, which is a building, which have information related to it. And that information is related to brands, producers, maintenance, as we all know, right? And in the future, it's already happening right now, that information is going to be able to integrate a bigger environment of people that come and interact with both this digital model, but as well with the full value creation process that a building represents, and that really the BIM represents very well, from the moment of financing to the end of the operational life of a building, like 50 or 25 or 50 years after its creation. So this logic of from problem to opportunity, from opportunity to value, from value to solution, as I say, is applicable to all industries. And architecture is not an exception. No matter how hard we try to think about it, and no matter how hard we say, architects are different, we only need to think about art, and we still see that in many schools of architecture, it's really not like that. It is really an opportunity. Entrepreneurial mindset, it's really something that makes the power and the art and the capacity to imagine of an architect much more powerful than that capacity by itself. So what is really the entrepreneurial mindset? For me, for us in short, it is this metaphor of being in a forest, a dark forest with this spotlight, kind of exploring what is around. And that forest would be, the reality, your industry, or the industries that are as well related to your industry. Trying to, in a constant search, and a constant search means really a constant search. When you're sitting in your desk in your office, which has already commissions, you keep with that constant search. And what are you trying to do? You identify what? Problems. You reorganize in your mind, and at least when you try to see opportunities, you reorganize value chains, how things are done, how people take resources, transform them, and turn them into value. And you suggest solutions, which can be buildings, which can be other entrepreneurial initiatives related to spatial design, or any other service or product in other industries. With two main objectives, three actually, but two, let's say, objectives, conditions. One is make it feasible, which is not dreaming. So feasible means that at the moment that Ford did the car, there was already vanadium so that he could actually do the shapes. There was a carburetor, which was basic for the motor, for the engine of a car, right? So it wasn't a dream. It was a reality that could be technically feasible in the short term. And also viable in terms of economic model, in terms of I am able to deliver more value to you than I actually take so that I can run a business out of it. And looking at the history of architecture in a very, very, very schematic way, and only looking at the problem or the idea that I just presented, we could think that, in 27, when Le Corbusier launched this book, Toward an Architecture, there was a first revolution in the way he thought about this, in the way he thought about standardization and about questioning all the previous ideas and the way that architecture was done, and thinking that it was really a machine that needed an objective way of being done and an objective way of valuing it in a way. And of course, that gave rise to the 5 points and to works, all the work, or majority of the work that we know from Le Corbusier. And then after there was a sort of second revolution, of course there were many other movements in the middle, but for the case, it's very interesting to see this as a second revolution in which architecture started to get really well connected with a boom, the industry boom at that point, which got very specialized. And for me, this building really represents that specialization and this idea that the building really works as a platform spatially. And that was actually part of the idea of Renzo Piano and Richard Rogers, but also technically and in how you really deliver that building in terms of having the gerberet produced by one industry, which actually is not even architecture industry, but was coming from ships, the escalators from another guy or another industry, the MEP, and all those pieces really got very discrete and identifiable as in comparison to this. And then we got to a point after many years of development in which the development of technique and of technology kind of ate progressively the role of the architect. We started getting tubes, all sorts of systems, regulations, and things which Rem Koolhaas criticized in a very smart way in the Venice Biennale with the elements of architecture proposition, which was basically, we're standing here and we're designing for basically this square space, but we're forgetting all the rest, right? And for me, what is interesting is that it is a question not only to the industry, but to the role of the architect. Like, what are we doing, really? How can we really fight and open our arms to delimit the space that we are entitled to have? As prominent and genetic creators of genesis in terms of ideas. And really, it is a moment to think about that, not only in terms of the architecture profession, but in terms of the full construction industry. If we see some of the graphs of the productivity, which is, for those who are not familiarized with it, the ratio between the input, the effort, basically the resources that you put and what you get out, right? So the average of all the other major industries in many countries, this graph is only Germany and United Kingdom, but it happens the same for parts of Europe like Spain and Portugal, and for the US, is progressively rising, whereas construction kind of goes crazy in some point and definitely goes down in general. And how come? We know much more about architecture than we knew before, because that's just the law of humankind. We have machines, we have technologies such as BIM, we have a lot of things, and how come all of that is now not producing more productivity? Ben van Berkel puts it in a very interesting way, which is we're entering the Walkman era while in the rest of the industries they are more or less in the smartphone era, which is another way to say this is a question of mentality. And this is what we are really coming, I'm really coming to explain in the next slides. And now we're living actually, which is very related to this. If this was technique and systems and kind of physical elements eating the profession of the architect, what we're seeing now is technological elements or technological entities really eating the profession of the architect, or developing many different directions of the profession of the architect and in construction that we really need to understand. And for me, that kind of is what I could call the fourth revolution in this timeline that I have created for this class. And of course, all of these cover different verticals, such as here we have drones, AR, VR, construction, robots, data analytics, financial management, risk management, design technologies. But all of that really is taking things, as we are going to see in the next slides, and implying things for the traditional architect that we must understand, acknowledge, and really embrace. So these are more or less the pieces of that platform as they evolve, as I just said, from the systems that are physical to the systems that are digital. So this image of the traditional architect, with all the admiration that I have for that traditional architect, and I mean, Maria just said, I worked with Moneo, I worked with Avalos Sienkiewicz, with Cruz y Ortiz, many people who really represent this, and I really have a lot of admiration for them. But the truth is that their model, the way they face business and industry, the speed at which they face business and industry really needs reinvention. Or at least it needs that us as architects, as a let's say, big group of people, establish complementarity between different roles, people that is covering that role and many people that is covering different other roles. So our challenge here is developing alternatives for the model of the architect. And that's why really the entrepreneurial mindset is important, that mindset that I just explained. So how do we start with that? We believe that it has to be really multi-directional in terms of feeding the architect with different domains that can be complementary to his value propositions. You just spoke about neuroarchitecture, that would be just one more. And with deeper integration of backgrounds and domains. Of course, the digital, but going much beyond the digital in terms of the tools that we use to create architecture, to create the physical object of architecture, but really, as Urban Data I, this company in Spain, says very well, substituting really the line of code for the line of code, which means, and this is just an example in the sense of technology, how both roles really need to get absolutely connected and understanding both how the other side thinks and conversely, right? Acknowledging that the future is really built with information, as we strive in this, as Modelica, which is a company of our related to our program, strives, and they're actually leading the market in Europe, not only because they're doing BIM for small or for big architecture companies, but because they're understanding that BIM really has a lot of value chains that can be served through the mindset of the architect. Cemex, the giant of concrete production and of many other products in construction, has understood that very well, and they're already sending out challenges. This is a challenge that is up right now for venturing, for entrepreneurship within construction and design. And they have different verticals, which are interesting to see because they're related to the problems that not architects think that exist, but the industry and other actors, which are in the end the ones for whom we work, really think that exists. So of course, smart cities and buildings, but also project design and engineering, supply chain management, which might sound something that it's only related to the engineer or the building engineer in a construction site, but it's also related to the way we think the city and to many spatial design variables. And other like investment and financing, innovative building materials and construction methods, so on and so forth. And as well, we need to acknowledge that materials, as I was saying, now they really imply many other things than the material itself, the shape. If we think about this false ceiling, might be mounted in pieces, like square pieces, that are in itself a product that is dumb, we could say, right? Whereas examples such as this company that is founded by an architect and a mechanical engineer in Spain, and that is really leading the market of energy and heating, what it implies is that, so their idea is this is a floor tile for radiant floor that is smart and that constitutes a grid, an IoT grid basically, that responds to the input of the people using it. So if I'm sitting in my office and I have a tile under me, that tile will hit, and the 4 or 9 tiles around will hit, whereas the next ones will not hit if someone is not standing in this chair. And that goes for the full building, including also vertical cladding if necessary. And that really means a lot of opportunity to reduce, like they are reducing by 30% the consumption in a building compared to the next and most efficient competitor. But what is important of that is not that. It's understanding that really the way in which we interact with physicality as architects really now implies many more things. And we're going to see an example of WeWork that is as well directly related to it. And as well, never forgetting the general problems that we as architects always face, such as migration from the countryside to cities, population growth, constant population growth, technification and robotization of our industry, which with all what that means, and it doesn't really only substitute workers in construction, but also with programs like Flux, it poses questions for what our profession means. If we have a software that is going to design in an optimal way, at least the bathrooms of a building, what does that mean for me as an architect and as an office manager? And so on and so forth. So it's basically about really, again, as Ford, stepping one step back and looking at the big picture and trying to integrate all of that into one vision of the architect. So, okay, a forest. That's kind of the forest in which we say that we have to be looking. But which forests, right? For us, these 4 are fundamental in the way that they influence this vision of the architect that I'm coming here to share and debate. And of course, design, we all know what it is. The digital, I just explained it. business, the notion of value and the notion of entrepreneurship, of opportunity search, constant opportunity search, and never forgetting that all we do in one way or another ends up having an impact in physicality, in the physical space, in the built environment, in the human environment, I would even say, and that what we need to find is ways to derive all of this to the physical world in a way. So this is the force that we really believe that is an interesting path to explore, and we are in a great moment for that because business, people who have been always very strange or very sitting very far from design, are starting to really acknowledge the vast importance of design in terms of business value. Not only in terms of beauty, in terms of how, wow, this building is nice and it really creates a great place, but in terms of value of this building really is going to make me or help me to deliver better things, to have workers that are more happy, to earn more money, and why not say it clearly, to earn more money in a way that is valuable for society, not only for myself. And this is a very interesting study and report from McKinsey from last November that compares hundreds of companies, of leading companies in different fields that are known or reputed by having design at their DNA. We could speak about WeWork, we could speak about Apple, other companies. And what they compared, they did a very deep research, and what they found is that those companies in general have more or less double revenues than their direct competitors that don't have design into their own DNA, such as Apple versus Asus or something like that, and more or less double returns on shareholders for the same comparison. So it is really a great moment for us to start thinking about that and relating with that world. So what I'm going to do now is a design overview of different examples in architecture that don't explain the project itself, but explain how I believe, or how we believe in IE that these projects relate to that mindset, okay? Separating them by different variables, if you want. So the architect and opportunity from the economic environment. So this means the architect reading the idea of opportunity as a result of understanding that there is an economic environment that is influencing what he or she is doing. London. London, as we all know, is a hectic city, very energetic and very fashionable, if you want. But at the same time, it is terrible for living. It has, as this great ad that I like a lot says, a shithole in Kilburn for £520 a month, which means that really, and this is really a reality. I mean, these two realities coexist very clearly, right? So at that point, a company in which the founders, part of them are architects, really said, there has to be a new way to live, work, and play. And we can't just wait for someone to design it for us. What does that mean? Company is the collective, and it's a company with which we as well collaborate in the masters. And they say co-living is a new way to rent in cities. So I'm going to read that quote for those who are far. Combining private and suites with a beautiful shared spaces and a program of inspiring events, all included in one monthly bill, we help our members to get the most out of city living. What they mean is that they are going to do a building, and they are going to design that building, which is going to be beautifully designed. They're going to curate who is going to come inside that building in terms of the diversity of the people, the interest of the people, and they're going to curate the experiences of that building, having a lot of shareable, if not semi-public spaces mixed with the housing, which help you to at least, for instance, have a personal trainer down in the basement or down in the gym, having dinners that are organized by people and to which you can just join, or having barbecues on Sunday evenings or some DJ playing music, and all of that is included in your bill. All of that together with the traditional cleaning, Wi-Fi, all those services of housing. And these are the buildings that they're actually doing. Old Oak, it's already done, and they're doing now Canary Wharf and Stratford, and they're entering Madrid, they're entering other cities. And what they're doing here is the full value chain. They're not waiting until somebody comes and gives them already the project done with the idea done to just distribute basically a space or give a volume and a size and respond to regulations of this building. So my question is, isn't it possible for architects in general to try to be part of that that higher and longer value chain, and starting from the beginning, accompanying the value creation from the beginning until the end, of course also taking care of the design activities. Couldn't we just say, as they said, look, there is a problem in the way we live now. I am going to come up with a new business and design model, and I'm going to decide that I need to find financing, put everyone together in the same page, and let them imagine this reality, design this reality, run and operate this reality. Isn't that more powerful? Wouldn't really the built environment be more powerful if we were able, architects, to impact it in such a way, at least in part, or part of us? Another example is this project by Alejandro Aravena in Iquique. And if we look at it, basically in very short, in 2 slides, the problem here was that he had to do social housing, right, in South America. And actually, well, it always happens, you know, you have money, you have more space, you have less money, you have less space, and you have chaos, basically. But he had a limited amount of money because it was public housing from the government, and that money needed to be used to buy land and to buy and build all the materials and build the proper house in which people were living. So there were 2 options. Either I buy the land, which is expensive, and under the general model, I do a bad house or a very, very tiny house like this one. Or I don't buy the land and I push the people out of the city, losing all their connections, moving their children from the school where they are, and many other disruptions for their family models. But I can build a bigger house, which is also a very extended model everywhere in the world. So he said, no way. I'm going to try to put both together. I'm going to try to understand how that economic variables can be an opportunity to really design in a different way. And that is what is interesting really about this idea. He said, there's no way I'm going to move that people. If I can only buy, if I can buy the land and only build half of the house, I'm going to find a way to build that half of the house in such a way that they can after build it by themselves and end up with a very decent housing unit for a full family that is actually safe and that is actually it's actually beautiful in its own emergence, right? And much better than what they had. So how many of you are not familiarized with this project? Everyone is familiarized? Wow. Huh? You have that as well. Okay, great. Okay, that's great. That's great that there's a... So what is good about this is that people who's not familiarized, sometimes they're surprised. I mean, this got repeated and is being done in Lebanon now and in many other places. Not because this window has a nice design, not because it's the last Swiss piece of engineering or because there's a nice cladding here, but because of the economic model, because of the shape that is deeply related with the way the people live and the way the people get paid and make a living out of make a living in general. Now, the architect interpreting technology. I was speaking about the smart tiles. How are we doing on time? Is it fine?
If you want to, we still have 20 minutes.
Okay, good. The architect interpreting technology. This is how previous generations is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it has some truth of how previous generations really worked, and this is how, and it has a little bit as well of an exaggeration, but this is how our future generations work. This is the ideal image of the millennial, of the digital nomad, and it is what really WeWork tries to capture, right? What is interesting about them, and WeWork, Brian Chesky is an architect, one of the 2 founders, and that's very, very appealing and very promising for us. What is interesting about them and that relates with this smart tile that I was speaking about is that they don't just take a space and put a bunch of people and a bunch of tables to rent and do co-working. That's not the real model of them, at least not the conceptual model, and it's not the magic of that model. There are 2 magics. One is the real estate management that they're doing and the way they behave with companies. I'm not going to go into that. And the other one is understanding space from the technological point of view. So they do it at 2 scales. First is the scale of the city, which is really using big data and buying big chunks of data to understand how the city is behaving and taking decisions based on that. Decisions as basic, but as basic and as simple as where am I going to locate my next spot, but as impactful as that at the same time. If it works, it's mainly because it was really well chosen. So they really understand who's there, what are they doing, how do they move, what are the businesses around, how much time do they spend, all that stuff. And they decide, in part, the locations based on that. One way of interpreting technology. But that doesn't stop there. It goes forward, and they are implementing BIM and IoT in all of them, in all of their projects now, with a really, really massive bet for it, to really understand how people operate a building afterwards when we are already done with it, right? Like now, understanding really, how is the pattern of distribution of people in this auditorium, which is a data piece that we don't have really. If we take the last 1,000 lectures that happened here, how people seated really, what were the hit points, what were the not so interesting points for the people, and many other variables. Do people sit close to the window in a room that is in one certain proportion or not? Do people prefer rooms that are square or more rectangular for booking a meeting, and so on and so forth. So the way they are doing this is helping them to reduce by 20% the space that they need to make to actually feed the same people, which we would say, that's kind of not nice. On the one hand, yes, it is not nice. On the other hand, it allows the business to be extremely successful. And what is very interesting is that it is the key for having the exact type of social life and balanced social life that they want to create, which is never too empty, never too full. And these two graph comparison is interesting for me because this is like a floor design. It aggregates a lot of floor design decisions, such as where do you put a door in a room, and they predicted, or they asked a lot of their designers what would be their intuition about how things would be done or should be done, and they responded with different positions according to each of the lines, which represents one variable, and then they used their algorithms and their data to see how things would react. And actually, yes, it's true that intuition is one of the biggest skills that we have as designers, but it is not as accurate as their technology. Of course, this doesn't work without the designer, but really it poses a question about what is the role of the designer in front of this kind of technology. And there are good things, there are challenging and scary things, and there are other very, very promising opportunities there. So this is the kind of atmosphere that they create with this balancing of never too full, never too empty, which always happens, and in other sort of co-workings just doesn't happen as good as there. We collaborate as well with Architecture 00, which is a small office. Well, now not so small, they're growing fast. But it's a small office in London that, they do architecture, they win prizes, they're very great architects. But at the same time, they have understood that really space is not only, and the value that architects can bring to space is not only about the creation of the physical space in which we are, the object or the building, but also about managing these kind of things. And they're entering and managing Impact Hub in London, all of them, and they're being very successful and creating an ecosystem of people that are related to creative industry that as well feeds back to their business model. Another one, the architect as a system thinker. We all know what this is, a drone. Let's forget about Amazon and let's forget about the model itself. Let's just take the idea of one element that is discrete, small, and is located in a space, which in this case is Central African Republic. And this space apparently has nothing. I lost battery, yeah. Apparently has nothing. Well, it has nothing depending on how you read it. If you read it with normal eyes, it has nothing. If you look a little bit beyond, it has a lot of needs, maintaining the livelihood of the people that live there, or actually creating a livelihood so that they can remain in their place. Of course, everything you do needs to have quality design. There must be a local industry, even though it is modest. There are problems with logistics, infrastructure. There might be some politics, health systems that might be improved, and so on and so forth. And there's a paradox here, which is if we think about drones, when we, generally in entrepreneurship, when you go to these pitching competitions and all that stuff, the spirit that you see is that, okay, I'm doing a technology startup, let's go to the place that has the more technology, right? I'm doing a drone company, let's go to San Francisco and fly my drones in San Francisco or in New York. But the truth is that actually it's very complicated in the case of drones. You can't, at least in Madrid, in New York, you can't just go and fly a drone there. There are tons of regulations, there are helicopters there are high rises, there's a lot of complications. So the most evident or the most immediate idea of matching technology to technology and development sometimes doesn't work, and thinking out of the box really tells you, okay, in a place where there's nothing, I can really fly, right? Versus this idea of not flying. So what is this project? It's by Norman Foster, and I guess you all know it, the drone port, which is basically a network of aerodromes for supply, medicines, food, and basic elements in Central African Republic. And what I like about this image is that, you know, many times when Foster appears or a project Foster appears, the most important part is him. But in this case, it's not him, the most important part, and it's not the drone itself, and it's not the building itself. It's nothing that you can actually see in this image is the most important thing of this project. It is the idea of the network. It is the reading of that system that they have been able to coordinate as an architect strategically to create afterwards, yes, well, Redline, the medical drone network, and afterwards, yes, and a series of pieces of architecture that are extremely well designed and very interesting, and a network that is spatially well thought by an architect. But really the important is how this network relates to this guy that has found a job there, or to these people that go there to find supplies and to solve some of their their daily problems. This is still under development. It is a prototype. There have been some domes, and they are there in Madrid doing the prototypes in the Norman Foster Foundation. But the idea is a system, and that is what I really like about it. The architect and the self-sustaining project. Now, in London, we were working last summer with Amanda Levete, which was part of Future Systems before it split or it died. And they do cutting-edge architecture from many types. Like in this case, well, this is not the architecture itself; it's the square behind. But basically, they just do tangible architecture. They've always been doing that, right? With a very futuristic vision, but always been doing that. And now they find themselves in London, which is an underused, a city filled with underused urban spaces, with an up-and-coming fitness culture, basically, and they were telling us because, you know, people are, as in New York, people need to really pump out all their energy because it's a stressful city, and a boom of self-managed spaces, which again is just a way of reading the environment in London, and they are in a moment in which they are searching for a viable economic model for their office. Why? Because they have done a number of competitions, and they are one of the most successful offices in the world, so they win a big number or a big proportion of competitions. But that big proportion, the truth is that they did 72 competitions. They were telling us the track, right? The last 72 competitions, they got around 20. They got kind of shortlisted. They went to the last phase in about 12. They got selected in like 5, and they're building 3 of them. So the economic model there is not as powerful and as resourceful as one might think. So they are really trying to find ways in which all their effort and their talent can be applied in first in a complementary way to the competitions part, which they find is essential, and I find is essential as well. But really trying to find a way to be more impactful and more efficient in the way they apply their talent. So they thought about this reality, and they said, well, there are these small plots that generally are close to infrastructure that are underused. Nobody rents because either they can't feed a high-rise, or for the reason, or a parking or something because they're too small. Let's try to find a model that can respond to that problem and to the need of people to do sport. So they thought about this project, which is interesting not because of the shape. The shape is, it's a result of the thought process. But it's interesting because for them it is a parallel structure to the office, ideally in the way they are selling it and trying to develop it. Is it a business in itself? It is a business in itself. It is a quickly deployable soccer or small sports pitch, and you can deploy it there and leave it there for some time in partnership with the owner of this land, and splitting the shares of the people who actually pay a fee to play there, that can manage through an app or just on a walk-in basis, right? And the idea is that all of that is self-managed as an independent financial structure from the office that feeds the office structure, but that is completely independent, and it's viable in itself if it goes to market. And just the mentality of that is very different. I'm finishing. So this is how it looks. And yeah, the architect is a digital space strategist. This one is one of my favorites, and I think is one of the most innovative. Urban Data I is a startup in Spain that is now working with Boeing to develop many things, and with cities to develop many things. But one of them is flying control systems for flying drones. And it's founded by data scientists and architecture and urbanism experts. And what they started saying is, look, this is Callao Square, which is one of the main squares in Madrid. And what they say is, look, we don't know anything about how public spaces behave. We have been doing and designing public spaces through intuition since ever. We go here when we do a project. Now, of course, there's a road here and there's another road here, so we might have the intuition that it's going to come this way. Yes, of course, but there are many other variables that escape to us. So what they did is putting cameras here, 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 with very low resolution, and doing an algorithm that they could imagine because they were architects and partnering with data scientists. And they started asking that algorithm to tell them, can you, in this image, in this video, tell me if this is a person or not, and if this is a person or not? And then they kept asking, can you tell me if this person which is moving from one point to the other is always the same person? Like, can you track that person throughout the full video? And also, can you tell me if there is a car in the middle of the square? And then they kept asking and asking and asking questions and getting more data with a really, really surprising, like about 99% accuracy algorithm. And they ended up being able to differentiate where people stay, how long do they stay, from which part to which part do they go, what's their age, more or less, in like 3 ranges. If there are cars, how long do they stop, what happens with the furniture, so on and so forth. So their model shifted from being just an architect that thinks about public space to a data provider about public space that actually gives deep insights, and that those insights are found really, really powerful for American cities, for Spanish cities, for retailers, big retailers, to really understand what happens in the public space, so on and so forth. So it's just another entrepreneurial track for that. And I think I have one, and I'm done. Okay, the proactive architect. I like this example because it kind of, UnStudio. How many of you don't know UnStudio? Okay, UnStudio is one of the prominent Dutch firms of architecture, which has been up for decades, founded by Ben van Berkel and Caroline Bos. And sorry? UN Studio, yeah. Okay, sorry, yeah, UN Studio. And what I like about this example is that if you look at their architecture since the very beginning, it's a very cutting-edge shapes, very cutting-edge architecture, great buildings, great design. But in terms of the structure of the office, in terms of the way of thinking, it was traditional until very recently. It was just basically me sitting in the chair, waiting until, as I was saying in the example with the collective, waiting until somebody comes with a problem already defined and tells me this is what you really need to design. And then I define what is a spatial problem, but not the full problem, right? So some years ago, a couple, they decided to split the studio into units. And what is interesting about it is not the structure of the units, but the spirit of the units. They assign to each of those units a mandate, if you want, and a limited scope of the industry, of what it means to really work and question spatial design. So there is interior, futures, architecture, just knowledge in terms of strategic research, product, and urban. And all of them, they told them, can you, the ones that are thinking about architecture, think about adaptive, resilient, future-proof buildings? Can you, in interior, think about holistic approach beyond the decorative, so on and so forth, asking many questions. So what they were giving these people, their units in the office, was basically the spotlight to actually tell them, this is the forest in which you need to search. And please don't stop searching. Please don't sit in your chair until you get the commission. Just search and see what you can do for the world before the world comes and tells you what you can do for it. Actually, as a result of that shift in mindset, they also created OnSense, which is this tech company that does things that are similar to Urban Data I in the way that they mix the understanding of cities, buildings, and interiors with technology. Just mention it because it's interesting to know how they span off that company. And these are the kind of questions that they ask. What if, there's always preceded by this, what if solar panels were smart and efficient and look so good that they could cover a whole facade? what if we could make cities and buildings climate neutral by 2030? And they actually do it. This is real. This is not a render. It's a panel that they did, and that when you display them, they do great patterns, and they cover full facades, and they're intelligent so that you can learn a lot about how they react and how they receive incidence of the sun, in which points they are more and less efficient, and they disappear with architecture, which is a great thing for architects, but we always have to deal with ugly, kind of old-styled panels like this. So in education, what we believe is important is that, and what many students don't realize generally, is that the biggest luxury of education is that you have really a time in which you are in a safe environment to explore and define what is going to be your role and the role of your profession in the future. Safe environment means you can explore without really risk, right? It's that time stop is really important. So that is what we push our students, and that is where we see people really defining architecture through some of these different questions in food, in privacy and physical activity, and so on and so forth. So the idea to wrap up is that the architect really thinks in a peculiar and valuable way, and that spatial design goes goes really beyond the creation of a physical object. It is a logic. It is a way of thinking that is the integration of, so it's a way of thinking that is divergent, systemic, collaborative, creative, experimental, and synthetic. And what does that mean? It means that as architects, we have an extraordinary capacity to imagine, to consider an ample spectrum of ideas, and I have to say much ampler in general than other professions that sometimes don't have that. They have other qualities that are complementary to ours, but not exactly these set, or some of these, but not all of them, or at least that's what we believe we're unique in them. So we are able to consider an ample spectrum of ideas, establish relationships among them, navigate ambiguity, which means at the same time navigate complexity, which in a world like ours, in which the boundaries between fields are blurring, is very important. And we are able to synthesize that into powerful ideas, guiding ideas for the long term, that are appealing to people, that are feasible and viable at the same time, that we call generally projects, but that can be called entrepreneurship initiatives, or can be called any other thing. And we do all of that amazingly well in collaboration and through experimentation, which means we can start working into solving complex problems without having all the information of that complex problem beforehand, which is very valuable, actually. So creativity, that mindset is really aligned to where future is going to go. Applying this thinking beyond the physical form of space is really the kind of potential that we are convinced that exists, and that responds to this alternative or complementary model of the architect that we try to pursue. And that is what we want to draw, the architect that we want to draw. That is the expanded vision that we have, merging business management, entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology and design for a leadership vision. And all I have to say to end is, don't wait for opportunity in your chair, just create it. Thank you. Sorry about the time thing.
Thank you for coming all the way from Madrid to share with us this valuable information. So we'll have an open discussion for around 10 minutes.
Let me just quickly get a pen over here. Yeah, I have one here. Yeah.
But please, does anyone have a question?
Yes.
Please introduce yourself, your name and your profession, please, before.
Good evening, Lara Al-Arab. I'm a career consultant and an educator. You talked about innovation and the role of architecture. And we know that artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. And you talked about all of the projects going on. Now, but you didn't specify, in this digital, revolution, where is the role of architecture? Don't you think this threatens the role of architecture? And on the other side, we have the other coin. We have cities that they are not sustainable. They don't have, minimum standards of the requirements of cities. So how can you, answer these two kind of interrelated questions? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very interesting and important question. And that is an idea that comes out many times when we speak about that, when we speak about flux or other technology developments in our profession. You know, I always put this example, which I hope is clear. Let's imagine that we're creating an airport, right? An airport has many spaces that are like, let's put an example, bathrooms. How many bathrooms can you count in an airport, right? Many, really, a lot of them. And spaces similar to a bathroom, really a vast majority of them. So the importance of the interrelations of those spaces is something that a strategic thinker needs to take. But really, a bathroom in itself is not rocket science, right? It's something that a machine could do. And we're spending and we're paying people who have minds that are much more powerful than the mind that is able to just do a bathroom. And why couldn't we use a machine or an algorithm to actually do that? I think that's not threatening at all our profession. What it's doing, it is liberating it to a very big amount, to a very big proportion, in the sense that the time that you spend doing that, now you can spend it trying to open that spotlight and searching in that forest, or having a crew which is less executional, if you want, and more entrepreneurial. So I hope that kind of solves your first question. And regarding your second question, I didn't really understand well is it just a general question about sustainability, or do you want me to link it to the technology side?
We have two sides of the coin. The first side are like the dilemma between, we have innovation, AI, machine learning, all of these platforms like digging in and helping the architect and the career itself. And then on the other side of the coin, we have a lack of vision, innovation,
Solving basic problems, yeah.
I don't know whether, like in Lebanon, I don't know if it's Spain. I don't have the research.
No, that's fine.
But I mean, to reach the SDGs in sustainability 2030, it will take us.
Yeah. Okay. If I might give you another example, cars. When we invented cars, they were extremely pollutant, right? They were pollutant. I mean, the very idea of a car is just something that it solves a lot of problems, but it creates problems as well. When you have 100 cars in a city, it's not a problem, but when you have the problems that we have in all the cities, it's really creating a big problem. But what happens is that technology, they generally have this curve, more or less, in which you invent it, it's extremely pollutant, it grows, it gets even more pollutant because there are more of them, although each car in itself is less pollutant than the rest. But then you get to a shifting point in which suddenly you get cars that are not pollutant, like electric cars, right? So suddenly that problem, I won't say it disappears, because there is all the production line for producing a Tesla car or whatever other car that contaminates, but all of that technology really has that potential of overcoming. What I think is critical, and it's not a solved challenge at all, is to do that cycle before it's too late, basically. And another example that I find very interesting related to the construction industry is what happens with the pollution in buildings. Buildings have they have the two sides, basically consume in two ways. One way is the operation during the full life of the building, like heating and lighting, all that stuff, during the 50 years of a life of a building, or whatever the average is in Lebanon. And there's the other point, which is doing all the products, bringing them to the site, putting up a building. That actually produces a very significant amount of pollution. If you look at the graphs of the last years, of the last decade, the part of operation has been drastically reduced, really drastically reduced. But the other part remains almost the same. And platforms, for instance, blockchain, for instance, are technologies that pose, in my opinion, opportunities to really start tracking those supply chains. Of course, in the medium, at this point in the medium to long term, but the promise is there, it exists. And the moment in which you start having that, well, you can start curating a market of construction and an industry of construction that is less pollutant, that is more transparent, and that hopefully will start reducing that other half of production. Whether we do that on time or not is another question. Whether there are other factors, such as in Spain, I'm working on that precisely, but we have like black market and other stuff that, of course, enters into conflict. But I think it's promising in that sense.
Okay,
Yeah,
we will
thanks.
take 2 more questions, please. Yes.
Okay. My name is Amjad, and I'm a master degree student. My question is a bit
Where are you? Where is
off
he?
track, you know, like you
Please,
introduced
Oh, okay,
Ford.
yeah, okay, sorry, I was...
Please,
Okay.
the mic closer.
Okay. You introduced Ford, Apple, BIM as innovative alternatives. And what if we thought on a bigger and wider scale, a city-like scale? Are there some examples of alternatives? Like we know all cities, or most cities suffer from problems. Like, are there some examples of alternatives and innovative intervention in cities, like on the urban scale, urban design scale?
Can alternative to what? Can you repeat that, please?
To like problems in cities. I mean, just not specifying what the problem is. Like, if there's any intervention.
So you mean in general,
Yes, in
any
general.
intervention?
Yes.
Well, I think you know there are many interventions with many. One of the most interesting initiatives that I find are promising is blending GIS, Geographic Information Systems, with BIM to actually track and to understand better how cities behave. And as well, this big data example of urban data eye really could get into things that are not only the open public space, but mobility or water movement in cities. Like I don't know how you say that in English, but and getting more into the environmental side of it. Problem is now we're dealing with other things like more basic steps such as implementation of technology in terms of BIM and so on, and it's kind of far away. But I think there is opportunity there still. And in terms of problems, well, I'm not gonna enter into it, but I brought a number of projects that are urban design that either this is from the office I was managing, and this is just a train station in which under the train station you have this beautiful space, and up on top of the train station you have as well this beautiful space, and this beautiful space. So this is up, under, and basically in all of these urban design projects, such as these other urban design projects in which this is under construction now and it's in Shanghai, and this is what we are designing with a series of pavilions all around the park. In this park, for instance, what is very important, it's not the design itself, but collaboration. There are 11 big companies here in complete interaction and being coordinated by someone who's the coordinator of the work. We are the lead architect for we were when I was a manager of the office, doing these main axes, but there's someone doing the landscape. There will be a museum here, there will be a tourism center here. There are 11 companies that need to be coordinated. There is a full citizenship that needs to be coordinated. And for instance, there are platforms that are starting to enter into that. The process of getting such a public work, and this park is the size of Central Park, a little bit bigger actually. So it's very big. The city of Shanghai is bigger enough, but it's really very big. And it's very important to make sure that all this process goes well coordinated between all the parties, and well coordinated with the city. For instance, technology is just an entrepreneurial thinking as well really permits to think about platforms that help you to connect the developer, the architect, and the institution, such as the Ordre des Architectes in this case, and the citizenship, right? And do that with the legal implications that really needs to have, which hopefully can help to have more balanced processes of citizenship participation, which at least in the case of my experience in my practice in Spain and in China is not as balanced as it should or it could. Not in the benefit of the citizens, but not in the benefit of the architect as well. I don't know if that answered your question more or less. Yeah. We have students in our program, for instance. There's a very interesting project from a student who is doing a platform for developers to actually put up in public their proposals and get participation from the people from the very beginning, before even the real legal participation gets to start, which helps them to reduce the risk, but also helps the people to say, hey, I don't like what you're doing, or I like what you're doing, go this way or that way. Yeah.
Please, that's a question.
Dana Sayer, Masters in Architecture. My question brushes into 2 points. First of all, I couldn't help but notice that you've linked strictly linked architecture and design to economic process, as in it is like a technical process, you get a product out of it. So where is the role of the architect? Where is the humanitarian touch of an architect, that sometimes it is linked to the social or the social context of a project? The second point is about the algorithm. You said that it is applied on public spaces, for example, and you gave an example of Madrid.
Mm-hmm.
How applicable is that algorithm, and can we generalize it to all the public spaces, or we should make this algorithm in each and every project we have to make?
Yeah, well, to your first question, I might go out back to this. It's a bit slow, I'm sorry. To the slide, this one. So, you know, strategy is one of the things that machine can't do, right? And creative strategy is one of the things that machines can't do, and many people can't do, but architects can actually do. Synthesis is another thing that that many people can't do, machines can't do, which is basically understanding that, you know, there's a problem, and there are many solutions, and those solutions are a response that is not exact. It's not about taking, and don't get me wrong, it's not about taking the algorithm that is doing bathrooms and applying it to do an airport or a city or a square. Not at all. It's about getting released from the weight of those things that machines can do and start thinking, applying actually what you say, the humanitarian power that I have, to the very important parts of design, right? And synthesis, it's basically about that balance between the humanitarian and the tangible part. Like, is it cheaper? Okay, it can be cheaper, but maybe the best solution is not the cheapest one. It's just the cheaper one, which at the same time helps people to, you know, be safe in the public space with a form that it relates to the local culture and whatever other variables you have. So it is really about deciding which solution are you going to bet for in an environment of complexity, which means an environment in which there are many solutions that could solve the problem. But is it the best way? And that is where architects really are extremely valuable, and that's why I am very, very positive. You know, in Spain, we've lived a crisis. I was out from school when we were in the middle of the crisis. The full world lived that crisis, but in Spain it was terrible for construction and architects. We had like 50% unemployment, which was great. And one of the things that I love about this article and about all the articles that speak about where the work environment and the work culture is going to go is that one of the things that we have that many people don't have is just imagination and that capacity. So our value, I'm absolutely convinced that over decades it's just going to rise, and that is where we will find different places to go. And your second question about the algorithm and about its applicability, I think it's as every algorithm, but I would dare even it's as every scientific process. You know, you do the equation. Of course, you have your theory. You do the equation, and then you need to test that, right? And you do one test. Okay, it's fine. It just coincides. Then you do another one. Then you do another one. You do 10, and then you find a deviation. You do 100, 1,000, and then you find a pattern, and then you can predict. So and that pattern really it has other variables that change. You know, it's not the same the speed of light in vacuum that in not vacuum. It really changes. So there are external variables to that problem that really have an impact into that. So in terms of that algorithm in specific, I would dare to say, although it's very soon, that if you do that in a number of Spanish or in a number of Madrid public spaces, like 4 or 10 squares that represent the variety of speciality that we have in the city, like big square, small square, blah, 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 then you can infer from that other spaces that have more or less or greatly similar variables will behave in a similar way. Then do you want more granularity? Do you want more precision? Then you can conduct it specifically for that space. And Urban Data AI has been doing that in the United States, for instance, you know, trying to infer, but at the same time doing those experiments in squares for 3 weeks or something like that. But if you think about it, like, what does it really imply to have a 3-week study in a public space that is going to be there for 200 years or 100 years? And it's exactly the same that people always tell you, the client, why would I just spend double on an architect if I can spend half of it? Like, yeah, but what does it really represent for you to spend 2% of your budget instead of 1% when I have all the impact of what is going to have there, what is going to happen in that building process and in that city, right? So, I don't know, it's just a way of seeing it, but I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you all. Please join us to the cocktail outside, so we will have the chance to discuss more.
Thank you. Okay, out. There you go. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much.
I'm Firas. I'm the president of the Urban Planning Association.
Oh, great. Nice to meet you.
Very nice. It was very interesting.
Yeah? Okay.
We will see you.
Yeah, I'll give you my card so that we are connected in LinkedIn and we can collaborate or whatever.